In 1914, the Colorado National Guard opened fire on a tent colony in the High Prairie. The tents held over 1,000 miners, their wives, and their children, families living in canvas. By the end of that day, the colony was reduced to ash and smoldering ruins. And at least 2 women and 11 children were dead, hidden in a pit beneath the fire. This was not an accident. It was a siege against the working class. Welcome to the Footnote Files, where history doesn't disappear. It just waits for the ink to fade. I'm Sarah A. Morris. Today, we look at the Ludlow Massacre, the bloodiest labor dispute in American history. A story of coal, corporate empires, and the families who lived in the crosshairs. In the early 1900s, southern Colorado was the domain of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. The work was brutal, dangerous, and poorly paid. But the miners didn't just work for the company. They lived in company towns. They lived in houses owned by the Rockefellers. They shopped at company stores using company scrip, money that was worthless anywhere else. Even the marshals and the preachers were on the company payroll. It was total control. To lose your job was to lose your home, your credit, and your community. In 1913, the United Mine Workers arrived, and with them came the legendary Mother Jones. The miners demanded the right to unionize. They wanted safer conditions and an 8-hour workday. When the Rockefellers refused to negotiate, the miners walked out, 11,000 of them. They were immediately evicted. In the middle of a blizzard, they moved their families into tents. The largest colony was at Ludlow, a strategic point near the railroad tracks. It was led by men like Louis Tykas, a Greek immigrant who saw this as a war for dignity. The Ludlow colony was a microcosm of the immigrant experience, Greeks, Italians, Slavs, and Mexicans living together. But to the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, they were just obstacles to profit. Obstacles that needed removing. The company built what the miners called the Death Special, an armored car fitted with machine guns. They drove it past the tents at night, firing randomly into the canvas to terrorize the families. The miners responded by digging pits under their tents, cellars where their wives and children could hide. When the private guards couldn't break the strike, the governor sent in the National Guard. By April 1914, the colony was surrounded. Machine guns were mounted on the hills. The day of the Greek Orthodox Easter celebration, a day of truce that would soon turn to fire. It started with an explosion, a signal. Then, the machine guns opened up on the tents. By the afternoon, the guard moved in. They didn't just shoot. They set the colony on fire. Louis Tykas went to meet with the guard to negotiate a ceasefire. He was beaten and shot in the back. Panic set in. Families scrambled into the arroyos, running from the fire and the bullets. But 13 people never made it out of the death pit beneath tent number 58. 2 women and 11 children suffocated as the fire above them sucked the oxygen from their lungs. When the fires finally died down, the bodies were found in a heap. The youngest was only 3 months old. This wasn't just a massacre. It was a declaration of war by a corporation against its own people. The news spread. Across the state, miners took up their own rifles. They called for a war of the classes. For 10 days, the Colorado coal fields were a battlefield. Mines were dynamited and guards were ambushed. President Woodrow Wilson finally had to send in federal troops to disarm both sides and stop the bloodshed. The strike ended in defeat. The Union was broken, but the Rockefellers' reputation was in ruin. John D. Rockefeller Jr. hired Ivy Lee, a man who would become the father of modern public relations. Lee orchestrated a campaign to soften Rockefeller's image. He filmed him visiting the mines, dancing with miners' wives. They reframed the massacre as a tragedy of unrest, a complicated situation with no clear villain. A commission was formed. Investigations were held. But in the end, no soldier or guard was ever convicted. The miners returned to the pits under the same company control. But the world was watching. Ludlow became a rallying cry. It forced the first federal laws against child labor and for workplace safety. The cost of those laws was written in Ludlow's ash. Years later, the labor movement would finally win the rights those miners died for. Today, a monument stands at the site of the colony, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. It forced us to ask, what is the true cost of the systems we build? And who pays the price? They were miners. They were families. They were living in tents because they dared to ask for a life beyond the company store. And when the Rockefeller Empire felt its grip slipping, it answered with fire. I'm Sarah A. Morris. This has been the Footnote Files. Next time in the Files, we journey from the prairie to the forum. The fall of the Roman Republic. A transition or a collapse. Rome didn't fall to barbarians overnight. It hollowed itself out from within through elite corruption. Weaponized courts. Paramilitary violence. Emergency powers that became permanent. Sometimes a republic doesn't fall in a day. It just keeps bending until it forgets how to stand. See you next time in the archives.